an incredibly important part of that is to be buying in an area where there's a lot of growth potential. So you need to know, well, why is this area good to be buying in? What's going to happen? How do you know that? Well, you can look at this, what I call the 3Ps, which are properties, purchasing power, and population.
Welcome to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, the leading weekly show to help you unlock your full self, health, and wealth potential. I'm your host, Bushy Martin, and each week I go deep with the best investors, experts, leaders, and founders to find out what it takes to break free from the grind, discover freedom, and live by design. Subscribe now and join me and get invested in the life you really want. Let's get started. Hi, freedom fighters. Are you a property investor or interested in investing in property and you want to achieve better results? Well, as I've mentioned many times before, sustainable success in property rather than one-hit wonders or overnight sensations resulting from the luck of the dice or chancing on the right property at the right time revolves around your skills to read and interpret property trends and conditions, along with the ability to remain calm and collected in the face of what can at first appear to be unpredictable and unexpected turns of events that cause the unsuspecting masses to panic and make reactive, knee-jerk, short-term decisions that often have long-term and unforeseen consequences. Or worse still, many become panicked and paralysed like rabbits in the headlights and do nothing because of the fear factory fiction being perpetrated by the mainstream media and end up as nothing more than roadkill on the side of the highway to financial freedom. So how to ignore the noise and be able to step back from the instant cut and thrust of constant conflicting opinions on what's supposedly happening as well as what's supposedly going to happen in the wonderful dynamic world of property that actually has more twists and turns and possible combinations than a Rubik's Cube, which out of interest is about 43 quintillion. Now that's 43 million, or 43 with 18 zeros after it. Now clearly, it isn't simple nor easy. Yet some investors defy the odds and are consistently able to read the tea leaves and achieve reliable, repeatable results. So what really separates the sustainably successful and the best investors from the rest? Is it just dumb luck, or is there more to it? Well, in my humble opinion, it's a combination of an analytical approach that revolves around interpreting the right data, mixed with a big dollop of worldly wisdom that can only be accumulated over decades of watching and observing changing property conditions alongside macro and microeconomic factors, and most importantly, resulting human behaviours. In other words, you need to be part analyst, part economist, part prophet, and part psychologist, all wrapped in the rare and most valued quality of all, and that's humility. You need to become a sage, where lived experience and accumulated wisdom always trumps oversimplified single indicator mind models or AI algorithms, which have become the latest trend, because rational intelligence developed over decades creates intuitive awareness that drives informed decision-making. There's just no shortcut to this. Expertise and outperformance in anything takes time. Patience, persistence, and artful reflection are key ingredients of sustainable success. Or, as Tolstoy beautifully summed it up, the two most powerful warriors are patience and time. So remember, great achievements take time and there is no overnight success. And no one encapsulates all of these rare qualities more than today's very special guest, John Lindeman. He's going to give us a sneak peek into the rarefied air of his property expertise and to share his enlightened insights. For anyone who's been involved in property for any length of time, John is a revered and respected as one of Australia's leading property market analysts. With over 20 years of experience researching the nature and dynamics of the housing market at major data analysts, John's renowned as the property market researcher that property experts go to for all of their Australian housing market insights. He's authored 2 landmark best-selling must-read books for property investors, being Mastering the Australian Housing Market and Unlocking the Property Market. And along with his innovative property research firm, Property Power Partners, he provides presentations, commission reports, and other research services on the nature and direction of the residential property market for property industry leaders and investors alike. So to help you better understand and interpret dynamic property conditions in order to make much more informed and better decisions that will ultimately help you to achieve sustainable outperformance results, I'm really excited to spend some time with one of my virtual mentors and an industry living legend. So welcome, and let's get invested, John.
Hi there, Bushy, and thanks for that wonderful introduction, and it's great to be here.
Well, this is a bit of another one of my bucket list moments, John. I've been a big admirer and a follower of your work for a long time now. And, as I just mentioned then in the introduction, not only do I admire the quality of your research and the work you do, but the humility that you bring to that is a very rare quality in this day and age, mate. So, and I know that's going to become very evident to those who haven't had the pleasure of listening to you before today's chat. So, mate, but I get ahead of myself. I guess for those who haven't been exposed to your words of wisdom in the past, can you sort of kick things off, John, by just giving us a bit of a rundown on what you do differently and, as importantly, why you do what you do?
Well, what I do differently, I guess, is that I research the property market full time, and I've been doing that for a long, long period, over 20 years, as you mentioned. We do a lot of on-the-ground research, do a lot of travelling around Australia, not always to, holiday spots, but actually areas where we think there is growth potential. Lots of presentations. I went to the Southern Highlands last week, Brisbane. Next week I'm off to Perth, and then a few weeks after that to Melbourne, and then another workshop in Sydney. So we're on the go all the time, because even though I've been involved in property investing a long, long time, some people call me a guru, others say he's the godfather of property investing. I'm not sure if that's a compliment, but you can always learn more, and the best way of doing that is by having a look to see what's actually going on.
Yeah, beautifully said, because there's certainly a big trend towards desktop data these days, and the I think over-reliance on AI, but nothing beats boots on the ground, hands-on experience to be able to interpret what it really means and to add those insights. So we'll get into that later. But I guess where I'd like to start now, if we can, is to circle back and to get you to take us briefly through a bit of a Reader's Digest of your journey so far, in terms of what you've invested your time, energy, money in over the years, and why, and how this has actually led you to what you're now doing today.
I guess it all started when I was about 20, and I'd moved to Melbourne. I'm actually from Sydney, but at the time I'd moved to Melbourne. And after a few years there, I discovered all my friends were starting to buy property, get their first home. And nearly all of them were buying 3-bedroom homes in the outer suburbs of Melbourne. And being from Sydney, at the time I looked at what was happening in the market in Sydney, and I thought, actually, it's more about, older terrace-style properties that have got the most growth potential. And I thought, why don't we buy one, because they're still pretty affordable, and renovate that rather than live in the property, as such, which was quite an unusual thing to do. My friends laughed at me, but we rented about 2 doors up from the property that we started to renovate. And I learned a lot about renovating, all the difficulties of that. But what happened was a very unexpected thing, and that was that my property doubled in price over the next 4 years. It was in Hawthorn in Melbourne, and their properties didn't go up much at all. So I thought, wow, I've hit the jackpot here. I know exactly what to do. I'll do it again. So we sold the property, and then we did the same thing again, only this time in the Bayside area of Melbourne, around Mentone. Yeah. And it didn't go up at all. And the property prices actually went backwards. We did a renovation and we lost money. And so, my journey very early on, when I was in my 20s, I realised that I didn't really know anything about the property market. I'd lost money heavily on the second deal. And I thought, I've got to find out how the property market actually works. And so that's when the journey really started, going to boot camps, workshops, all sorts of different types of events where people were telling me about how the property market worked. So it started then, and it's still going on right now.
Yeah, awesome. So a couple of things I wouldn't mind zeroing in on there. You said all your mates were getting into property before you jumped into your first one. Why were they doing that? And I know it's going back a long time, John, but can you remember what your thinking was at the time? Were any things that you were thinking, gee, I'm not sure about this, or what was it that actually got you to jump across the line? And then as a flow on from that, I wouldn't mind just sort of expanding on why the first property did well versus the second one didn't, on the basis of the accumulated knowledge that you've put together since then.
Well, I think at that time it was possible to buy a property. You know, when you were fairly young, it's a lot harder now. So I guess we were lucky in that regard that we could actually buy a property. But the reason we chose Hawthorn instead of an outer suburban area was because we had no intention of starting a family. We thought it's just the two of us, and we can actually, you know, spend time renovating. And the reason I took that approach was because my brother was a builder and my brother-in-law was a surveyor, building surveyor. And so they sort of showed me that you can actually make money out of doing stuff with property. You know, you can manufacture that equity. So I thought about it rather differently, I guess, to my friends. And the reason it went up a lot in value was because terrace houses became very fashionable and everybody wanted to buy one and live in one. And it was about that time, you know, so that was when terrace houses sort of, you know, instead of being old eyesores, became fashionable properties to live in. And they went up a lot in price. And that didn't happen in the second area that we bought in, which was around Mentone, because there was no such change in buyer demand.
Yeah, okay. No, well, I'd love for you to sort of thread the needle a bit more for us in terms of, you know, you had those couple of experiences, you started to do a bit more research and reading and everything else. How did that lead you into the property analyst field? Can you sort of paint out the territory for us? And
yeah,
we go.
Of course. So what happened? I went to lots of these boot camps and workshops and free events, and I realised that all these people were telling me a lot about the property market, but they weren't actually explaining to me how it worked and how you could benefit as an investor. And that's really the one thing I wanted to learn. I thought, well, if no one's going to be able to tell me this, I've got to go and find it out for myself. I'd finished my studies and I joined the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and I was there for 5 years, and I discovered a thing called trend analysis, which was making a lot of people very wealthy, because what they were doing was using the ABS data to trend things forward, like price of gold or commodities or shares, and using this to actually work out what was likely to happen. And I thought, well, if you can do that with other commodities and other assets, why can't you do that with property as well? And so I started studying this, and I discovered that the property market actually works just like any other commodity according to the laws of supply and demand. And once I'd made that discovery, I thought, this is it. I've worked at it, you know, how to do it, how to make money out of property. So that became my main aim from then on until now, to, you know, be successful in investing in property.
Yeah, I love that. So relating that to your own experience then, after Mentone, were you applying what you are learning through that trend analysis back into your own investment? Can you sort of paint the territory out for us a bit more in that regard, and where that got you to?
Well, we moved back to Sydney, and I think I became a bit too smart, because I thought, I understand how it all works now, and so I'm going to buy a house and not just get the market-driven growth, but also we're going to renovate this property. Now, it was entirely the wrong type of property. It was in Sydney in the Northern Beaches. It had been converted into 3 units, and I decided to convert it back to a normal house, which was a rather big house. It had 3 bedrooms and about 4 or 5 bedrooms. But although we were able to do that, it was completely the wrong type of property for the area. It was all young families and people with kids who didn't want a large house like that. And so, you know, again, I learned from a mistake that when you're going to do something like a renovation, you've got to renovate to the most popular type of property and not away from it. So that was a big lesson I learned. The next property after that, I did a much more sensible renovation. And I did about 3 or 4 renovations in turn, each time learning more, not just about renovation, but about what sort of renovation to do in any area.
Yeah, awesome. No, we might sort of dive into some of that as we move on. But it's something that I always like to put guests on the spot with, John, is to share something unique or interesting about you that you've never actually shared publicly before. What have you got for us?
What I've never shared? Well, I think, what would it be? I guess the main thing is that when I wrote my 2 books on property, the property market, and then I went back to the publishers and said, look, I'd like to write another one. And they said, look, you've written 2 books on property investing. Why don't you do one on personal development? And that really threw me. And I thought, I've never really thought about personal development in that way. So what I've been doing is sort of structuring how you can better use your time and analyze why you're doing certain things. And I've never talked about this before, but so the next book might not be about property at all, but more about how to get things done that you really want to get done in your own personal life.
Love that, John, because I've got my own philosophy on this, and that is that I think sustainable success lies at the intersection of self, health, and wealth, and they're like 3 legs of a stool. And self being what you think, what your expectations, attitudes, beliefs are, that lead into the happy habits that you develop through your health, that build the patience and persistence that then combined helps you achieve wealth in however you decide to define that. And if you don't have the self and the health in play, then you can self-sabotage yourself without even knowing it's going on. So without you expressly thinking about it, I think the personal development book would be a great complement to the awesome property books that you've already written in that context. So I can't wait to see it, mate. We'll keep an eye out for that. Do you have a working title at this stage, or is it a bit early in the piece?
Well, it's going to be called Signs of Life, and the idea being that it points you in different, what are the signs of life? It's a double meaning of the word signs, and the publishers seem happy with that. So, but, writing books is something I love writing. I love presenting. It's what I enjoy doing. And so I just think it's another aspect of doing what I like doing. Yeah. And maybe, providing some good information along the way to other people.
Yeah, having been through the writing experience, I often say that it's been the best personal development course I've done myself in writing the book, because it really forces you to think hard about what you actually do believe and communicate that in a way that's going to be meaningful to others. So it's a great process, just sitting down and really fighting with yourself to really be able to download key information that is going to be useful to others, mate. So I can't wait to get a copy, mate. I want to put myself on the list right here, right now, to get a copy of that book. Mate, what I'd love to dive into now is to sort of get you to unpack what challenging event in your life, and it doesn't have to be property-based, but it can be right across the board, what challenging event has brought about your greatest learnings and your best changes as you reflect on it?
I think challenging event was really that second property purchase. I've had a few more since then, but that was really the realization that I thought I was, smarty pants and I knew everything, and I really didn't know anything at all about the property market. And at the time, it was a lot harder to know exactly what was going on. I mean, these days we've got all this information available at our fingertips, and it's really easy to get listings, sales data, prices, whatever you need. But at that time, it was much more difficult. And so I thought, I'm never going to be able to work this out. And it took a long time for me to go through and just stick with it. And I think that what I learned from that was to persevere. If you really believe in something, keep on sticking at it.
Yeah, I think it's a really good lesson, because particularly in property, you would have heard the stats more often than I have. And I think it's an ABS stat, actually. I think over 54% of first-time investors sell a property within the first 5 years, never to return. And, the unfortunate part about that is it's probably more about them than it is about the property. And to ignore the learning opportunity that comes out of some of those things is a great waste, because it's those instances that teach us the most and prepare us better for what lies ahead. So love that. One of the other things I like to get a special guest like yourself to share with us is, and again, if you can reflect back, what was your investment strategy when you first started? And how has this evolved and changed over time, and why?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And I think what I learned was that, and a lot of the sort of boot camps, workshops I went to early on were saying you've got to get 10 properties in 10 years and all this sort of thing. And I could see that there was a real fatal flaw with that, because it's not about how many properties you own, or it's not even about the equity you have in them. It's about what stage of your property investing journey, or your investing journey generally, that you're at. So when you start off, you might say, well, I haven't got much, I've only got a small deposit. But what you can do, if you're buying an area that's got a lot of growth potential, then you can use the bank's money. You can borrow that at, say, 6%, and you're getting 12% growth. That means you're actually using the borrowed money to make money for yourself. And that's the first lesson I learned, is that when you start out, it's about getting as much growth in as short a period of time as you possibly can. I'm at the stage of my investing life now where I don't really need to get more capital growth. And it's not because I don't, I'm not greedy or anything, but it's just, I'm just going to end up leaving it to my kids or grandkids anyway. What I'm after is cash flow. So at my stage of property investing, I'm looking at buying and owning properties that have got high cash flow, and I'm doing so, I haven't got any debt on those properties. So the rent income is actually my cash flow. And that's, as I see property investing is a journey where you start off with borrowing as much as you can safely, but you end up where you don't owe anything at all, but you're buying in areas and owning properties which have got the highest cash flow potential.
Absolutely. It's, again, there's a bit of a misnomer, I think, amongst a lot of investors, that the idea is just purely to keep buying properties, pay off the debt and live off the rent. As you and I know, the sorts of properties that grow aren't always the best yielding properties. So there needs to be a transition in your thinking as you go from growth to cash flow. And that means different types of properties in different entities and different structures that's going to give you that tax-effective income stream, and potentially even a rationalisation of the portfolio as you shift from that growth to cash flow component. So maybe a discussion for another day, John, might be to sort of dive into that a little bit, because it's certainly an area that I don't see a lot of people talking about. It is that transition phase when you're switching across. Because if that's not very delicately handled, then you can end up giving a lot of it back to the tax office at your expense, and therefore hamstringing what the ongoing lifestyle as a result of that remaining and residual income that you've created actually transpires. So one question I would like to dive in there as well, if I may, is in the context of these speakers that talk about 10 properties in 10 years and all the other hoo-ha that goes with it, is how much is enough for you? Because I don't know about you, John, but I'm in a very similar stage of the exercise, and my wife, Sonia, and I have sat down and worked out exactly how much we need to sustain the lifestyle that we enjoy, and we're certainly not, elaborate with that. We live pretty simply, but it's not a massive number. And if you've done the right things, then it gives you your time back to be doing things like I'm doing today, and that's enjoying a great conversation with you. Where does that sit from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's all about the difference between income and wealth. That you work to get an income, and that takes up all your time. But when you've invested successfully and you've got a lot of wealth, you don't need to spend much time on maintaining that wealth at all. And for me and my partner, it's just simply, do we have enough to enjoy a simple lifestyle? We don't go out very often. When we do travel, it's for work. So that's all, we like to go to nice areas, but sometimes we have to go to areas where there's growth potential and find out why. But it's all about maintaining a lifestyle that's active and healthy, and that having enough wealth gives you the freedom to do that. And I think that's really the important thing about the difference between the two. And you should be, when you're working hard for someone and making money, think about, well, what'll I do after this? I can't be doing this all my life, and I need to start looking at accumulating wealth that's going to look after me when I get older.
Yeah, beautifully said. I'd love to sort of touch on the subject as well, because it sounds to me like you're already living your ideal lifestyle, and the ongoing education and research into property and where it's heading sounds like something you're going to continue to do for a long time yet. A couple of obvious questions. Is that the case? And if that's so, because I guess one of the things I hear a lot of people talking about is that once I hit the magic number, that's it. I'm going to sit on the beach and drink mojitos for the rest of my days. You and I both know that you don't remain very happy doing that for very long, because life has no purpose. So where does that sit in your context?
Yeah, I think the idea of having that enough wealth, it gives you the freedom to do what you really want to do. But it's knowing what it is that you want to do. That's the hard thing. And for us, it's very much doing what we do right now. I love doing podcasts and blogs talking about the property market, and we're completely independent. We don't sell property or anything like that. So we're not trying to, make money out of the information we provide directly. It's all there because of stuff that we've learned over the years, or that I've learned. So it's very much about sharing the knowledge and being able to pass it on, because I think, well, I can do what I'm doing now, and I can still present, and I can still do podcasts and blogs, but, I don't know how much longer I've got. I'd like to be able to share as much of that as I possibly can.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same position as you. As long as my voice holds out, and the voice is one of the things that generally doesn't fail us over the years. In fact, voice gets better as we age, I keep getting told. So I think there's a pretty good roadway ahead for both of us in that respect, John. But if we sort of reflect back on your journey so far, and you might have touched on this already, but what do you consider to be both your best and your worst investment, and what have you learned from each of those?
Well, I think I've covered a few of my worst investments. And I mean, at the time when I started, a lot of my friends were buying gold and shares and things like that. And I dabbled in those, but didn't really lose any money, but I never really made any either in it, because I didn't really understand what I was doing. And so I've stuck with property because I do understand how the market works and how you can, avoid making those big mistakes. So I think that, the biggest mistakes were buying the wrong type of property at the wrong time. And that's something I've learned a lot from. And I still see people doing that, going into areas and buying. It might be the right time to buy, but they buy the wrong type of property, or they pay too much for it. So I'd say, whatever you do with property investing, always make sure that you've got the right advice from the right people before you jump in and start making decisions.
Totally agree. What about on the flip side? What's been the best investment, and what have you learned from that?
I think the best investments have been applying the rules and the laws, that I've learnt. Looking at areas where there's going to be a sudden increase in buyer demand or rental demand, and buying in those areas. And it's not really that hard to do. I mean, one example was in the Riverina town of Hay, where the company Oscott, the cotton farming cooperative, was going to build a cotton gin, and they needed 160 workers to do that. Now, I had a look at Hay. There were no rental vacancies and very few properties on the market. So I figured that if 160 families were going to move into an area like that, rent demand would escalate, and then, of course, rents would rise, and then more investors would move in. That's exactly what occurred, and it's the best result I've ever had, and property prices doubled in 7 months. And you wouldn't think that was possible, but they did. They went from 100,000 to 200,000 in the space of 7 months, and the rental yield was over 10%, so the property was paying for itself. So they're the sorts of results you can get if you apply the logic of supply and demand to property.
Love that. Absolutely love that. And again, you're doing the research ahead of the curve. to pick up on that, which we might dive into a little bit later. But if we sort of reflect back on where you've come to and where you're at, if you were starting out again, John, what will you invest in differently, if anything?
I'd like to start earlier than I did. It'd probably also, if I could start over again, I think, one of the things is that we tend to be influenced by our parents a lot. My parents grew up during the Great Depression and the Second World War, and they said debt is bad. Don't borrow money; it's all bad debt. And it took me a long time to realise that there is such a thing as good debt, and that is the money you borrow from the bank to buy a property can be good debt if you're only paying 6% interest and you're getting double that in return on growth and rent, then that's a good way of being in debt. And I think that's a lesson, I should have hopefully learned a lot earlier. It'd be great if I could have, but it was one that came to me rather slowly.
Yeah, no, very well said. Well, I'd want to sort of dive now into your area of expertise around the whole analysis piece. And sort of kick that off, you've done some great work when I was sort of Google stalking some of the recent work you've done and some of the past work you've done. I'd love for you to sort of set the tone for us by sort of unpacking briefly what you consider to be the 7 deadly mistakes property investors make and how we can avoid them.
The 7 deadly mistakes. Well, I guess the first one would be don't buy with your heart instead of your head. This is a mistake many people make, especially when they go on holiday and they see a beautiful little cottage by the sea and they think, we could buy that. We could go here on holidays and we could rent it out at other times, Airbnb it, and it'll go up in price. We could even, sell it for great profit later. What they have made the mistake of doing is they're using their heart instead of their head. It could be an area where property prices are about to crash. There's no rent demand. You don't really know unless you do the research. So the first one is always look at the numbers, buy with your head, not with your heart. The second one, I think, is the one we see very often is fear of missing out and people jumping in, buying a property because everyone else is. We've got to get in quick or we'll miss out. And a lot of booms, end that way when people jump in. They all start buying. You get a lot of price growth, and then the whole thing just suddenly stops and can even go backwards. So avoid the temptation to buy just because everyone else is. I always say, it's best listen to the experts who say don't buy when other people are buying. That's when you sell. Do the opposite. The third one is, I think, is also very common, is listening to gossip, hearsay, newspaper headlines, which tell you that a certain area is about to boom or that the market's about to crash or whatever. Don't listen to the headlines and don't listen to the gossip and the hearsay that you might hear in the office, because it's not informed information. Always do the research yourself properly. And another thing is that the property market is pretty much unregulated, and that means that a lot of people can operate in the market with impunity and make all sorts of claims that they can't do with other assets like shares. So what it means is that there are people out there who I call wolves in sheep's clothing, who'll tell you, buy in this area and you'll double your money in a few years. You'll get massive rent returns, population growth is imminent. Those sorts of people are usually making money out of selling you a property. So what happens? You go to an event. At the end of the event, there's a rush to the back of the room where they're going to, sell a few exclusive off-market properties to you. And you can be sure that they're going to be making a lot of money out of those transactions. So, always, it's quite easy to do these days. You just research people's bona fides. You can go in and Google their names and see if they've been investigated by ASIC or what their track record actually is. And I always recommend people do that before taking any advice from anyone, especially, and even myself, you're quite welcome. Go ahead, Google my name and see what comes up, because I don't have, that sort of issue, but there are a lot of people out there who do, and you need to know who they are. The other problem is people might buy a property, and this is a mistake I made, which is the wrong type for the area. Or they renovate to a property, they might renovate to a 4-bedroom property in an area where most of the people want to live in 3-bedroom properties. So, always make sure you're renovating to the right type of demand, or buying a property that's going to be in demand rather than the other way around. And I think I'm up to 5, so there's 2 to go. Another big mistake people make is paying too much for a property. So never buy a property unless you've got a really good idea what it's worth. Now, there's lots of free information sites out there powered by the major data providers, which are CoreLogic and PropTrack, and you can go to their sites and you can get a free estimate of what a property is worth. You can look at how much it's gone up in value over the last few years. There's a wealth of data that's available, and it's all free, and it will make sure you don't end up paying too much for a property. The last mistake is one that it's also very common, and that is selling at the wrong time. There's nothing worse you can do than if you've been sitting there for 10 years waiting for a property to grow in price and to sell, and then to find it doubling in value over the next year. So always make sure you know what is the growth potential, because you don't want to be selling just before the growth starts, and selling at the wrong time is a very, very big mistake that a lot of people make, because they give up and they miss out on the growth just before it occurs.
It's absolutely spot on. I've seen that time and time again, unfortunately. I want to sort of jump to the flip side of the spectrum on that, if I can, John, and get you to unpack for us what you believe to be the keys to successful investment and why.
I think the key is at the start to use leveraging as much as you possibly can. Now, that means borrowing as much as you safely can, but an incredibly important part of that is to be buying in an area where there's a lot of growth potential. So you need to know, well, why is this area good to be buying in? What's going to happen? How do you know that? Well, you can look at this, what I call the 3 Ps, which are properties, purchasing power, and population. And so you look at what's happening at the moment in that market. If there's only a few properties listed for sale, but the sales are really high, and again, you get that, just go to a major listing site and all this information is provided now for you. So if there's only a few properties for sale and that number's declining, but the number of sales is increasing, that means that it's got imminent growth potential. And then you look at, well, who's buying in that area? What type of people and households are they? And if they're older people who are, downsizing, they're cashed up, that means they've got high purchasing power. If they're first-home buyers, with interest rates rising, they've probably got far less purchasing power. So, you can work out the potential just by looking at the type of households in the area. And the last thing is the actual change in population. So if you're buying in an area where the people are moving in, let's say, again, if they're older people downsizing, is it the sort of area that people are likely to move to? Or what sort of, households are moving into an area, and is that increasing or decreasing? So using these simple analytics to get a much better idea of what the growth potential is for a market, where you should be buying and where you shouldn't.
Beautifully said. Sort of translating from that then, in your experience, both personally and working with others, what are the qualities and key character traits that separate great investors from the rest, do you think?
I think the great investors are those who well, firstly, they're not scared to ask questions. They don't believe they know it all, which is something I learned that I didn't know it all. And you can rely on there are mentors and experts out there with good information. So I think that's one of the secrets is, never be scared to ask, and always go to the experts and find out what they can tell you. I think that's really the key to success. And the second thing is to do your own research and be really sure about an area's potential before you make any decision to buy a property.
Yeah, no, absolutely spot on. Opinion's very cheap, but data doesn't lie if you're looking at the right information. Now, I sort of just want to touch on your books, because they are, sort of timeless tomes in that regard, Mastering the Australian Housing Market and Unlocking the Property Market. I'd love for you, because I'm really, encourage people to grab copies of those books to increase their awareness of the framework that they should be looking at property with moving forward. Why did you write them? What are the key messages in those books, and who's best suited to read them, John?
Well, the first book, which was Mastering the Australian Housing Market, I wrote that in 2010. And just in terms of talking about the discipline in writing a book, when Wiley's asked me to write that book, I was about to go on an overseas holiday to Europe, and the deadline was the day I got back. So I spent most of my time on that holiday writing the contents of the book, much to my partner's annoyance. I missed out on the Eiffel Tower and everything.
No.
But that's what it does teach you, is discipline. If you're going to meet a deadline, you've got to put in the time to do it. But the main reason was because I wrote that, it was just after the GFC, the global financial crisis, and I was at ResidX, the head of research at ResidX, and when that crisis occurred, a number of the major lenders came to me and said, John, we're really concerned that housing prices could actually fall. Now, they'd never considered this before. They thought they just keep going up. And suddenly what happened in America, where housing prices in some areas crashed by 40%, they thought, God, if that happens here, we're in big trouble, because we've been lending, 80% LVR. That means 80% of the value of a property is borrowed money. So I said, can you start working out for us what are the main indicators, how you can work out whether prices are likely to fall? And so I looked at all the, sales listings, rental vacancies, all of the different indicators that are out there, and then came back to them and said, yep, I think I've worked it out. This is how you can tell where housing prices are likely to fall over the next couple of years, which they gratefully used to their advantage. But I then thought, hang on, you can turn that around the other way, and you can actually say, well, if I can work out where housing prices are going to fall, I can conversely say, well, which areas have got the greatest growth potential over the next year or two? And I thought at that point, that's what I need to put into a book to explain exactly how and where you can find these sorts of areas by using data that's freely available. And so that was the end result, was that book. And who is it meant for? Well, really anybody who's interested in how the property market works. If they're thinking I might become a property investor, then this is the right book for you. I wrote it, as I said, 13 years ago. Wileys have come back and said, can you do a post-COVID version? We need you to update it. But I don't really, feel too inclined to do that. I think it's still relevant in its current format because the rules of the market don't change. They're still pretty much the same, and they'll always be valid.
Yeah, it's absolutely spot on. There are some sort of timeless principles that create a bit of a framework and a lens that allows you to look at what's happening. And I'm probably assuming that your 7 Steps to Success course that you've developed, which is also a great ready reckoner for people to really upskill themselves and in that regard can start to lead them down that pathway. You're able or happy to share some of the key elements of the 7 Steps to Success exercise that's going to help us get better results in both our current and future property investments, John?
Well, it's an online login course that people can buy if they wish, but it really encapsulates all of the tips, the tricks, the techniques, the templates, the checklists, the questionnaires, everything that I'd learned to develop over 40 years of investing in property. So putting all that together into one course, saying, well, these are the different tools you can use, and also videos explaining how to use them. So that's really what the course is all about, and these tools and techniques and so on show you how the market works, where to buy, what to buy, when to buy, how to narrow down your search, how much to pay for a property, and even things like how to negotiate with agents and so on, and then how to know the right time to sell. So it covers all of those. But what we do is a lot of that information we provide in blogs and podcasts on a regular basis. So a lot of that information, I think I did one with you a little while ago about the slingshot effect, Bushy.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Great tip.
People, and all of that's available. That's on our website. So a lot of the information, I share quite willingly to say, look, this is how the market works and this is how you can benefit.
Yeah, I love it. Now, you've also got an ebook that probably encapsulates a lot of that, summarises your best tips and tricks for property buyers. Can you give us a quick taste tester on some of the key learnings that flow out of that one?
I think the main learning from that is all about timing rather than time in the market, and the importance of buying in an area where you've got huge or strong growth potential rather than buying for long-term growth. Because, the market over long periods of time, it goes up an average of about 7% per annum. That's including inflation. But that's not really enough to get you, where you want to be. So what I always recommend is let's buy in areas where you've got really good, strong, imminent growth potential. And then after that growth has ended, you can then sell and do it all over again. You're going to be much better off. So they're the sorts of things that I show people how to do.
Yeah, love it. Well, again, I'd love for you to just give us a glimpse under the hood of what you believe are those things that do suggest that an area is about to experience some imminent growth potential. What are some of them?
I think when you look at what's happening right now, for example, we've got 400,000 overseas arrivals coming into Australia. They're heading into certain areas, which are mainly our big capital cities. They're nearly all renters. So I think, the biggest dynamic you can see occurring right now is a massive increase in rent demand. Rents are going to go up. And no matter what state governments try to do to regulate, rent increases, they're still going to go up. And it means that yields will go up. So rental yields are the return you get from rent. That's going to increase. So I can see that these are the sorts of areas that have probably languished most during the COVID years, like the inner urban unit markets. I think they've got huge growth potential over the next, few years. And then leading on from that, when these people that have come here, after a few years, they want to buy their first properties, we're likely to see another huge housing boom in terms of first home buyers. So that could be, 3 or 4 years away. But I think that'll be the next big boom, and it could be the biggest one of all, going based on the number of people that are coming into Australia.
Yeah, I love that. I just sort of did a bit of reading around some of your thoughts on that on your website in terms of the set and forget suburbs with the highest long-term growth potential, and your commentary around the prospect that we are and could be heading for our biggest property market boom ever. So would you be happy to share a couple of tidbits around where the sleepers are and where they're set to boom as a result of that?
Yeah, well, there's a number of sleepers, I think, that that is set to boom. When we look at our population, 1/3 of our people are aged 55 and over, and they're getting close to retirement, probably thinking about downsizing and maybe relocating. So we've got a lot of people who are planning to move over the next few years, and they'll probably move to, coastal holiday type recreational areas. So I think that that's one of the biggest areas for growth potential. When you look at, and this is one of the ones I picked in 2022, was Sussex Inlet in New South Wales. That went up from 600,000 to 230,000 growth in 1 year. And that was one of my predictions that I made publicly. These sorts of areas have still got huge growth potential. So I'd say that, one of the secrets I can share with you now is when you look at those sorts of coastal holiday areas, and they're all around Australia, from around Hervey Bay, the Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, northern New South Wales, the southern coastal cities of New South Wales, East Gippsland in Victoria. We look at South Australia, the three peninsulas, the Fleurieu, York and Eyre Peninsula, all have got huge growth potential as people move there in retirement, not too far away from capital cities, but they're going to be, having a lot of spending ability because they'll be selling homes worth, up to $2 million and maybe putting 600,000 tax-free into their super, and they're still going to have well over $1 million. So that, there's a lot of growth potential just in those markets alone.
100% agree. The sort of cashed up boomers, as they move through into lifestyle decisions. I heard recently, and again, you'd be more over this than I would, John, but I think it's about 25% of purchases in recent times in some of those regions are cash purchases by people in that sort of over 60 bracket. So, which doesn't have the issues around lending money and borrowing capacity that a lot of other younger property purchasers are experiencing. Does that line up with your thoughts?
Very much so. And it's also the case that they're not employed, they're retiring, so they're not looking for work. I mean, they might get a part-time job just for something to do, but they're not reliant on income for so they're not going to be moving to areas where there are job opportunities. So it all combines, and I think you can see a lot of growth potential. In fact, I'm sure of it, that a lot of these areas, and even when people get older, like in areas, I looked at areas all around coastal Australia where there's Sussex Inlet is another good example, very high median age, but people, even though they're getting to the point where they need assistance, they don't want to move again. They've made new friends and they've decided this is where we're going to stay. So a different type of accommodation again. But this is going to go on for probably another 10 years, I'd say, before that growth boom that the boomers have caused will come to an end.
Totally agree. And I think you make a really good point that they'd rather stay where they are because they've established their network. So we're seeing, I had the pleasure of interviewing Simon Kirshner, Bernard Saltzoff's side of the demographer recently, and he talked about, one of the biggest booms of renovation, putting lifts into properties to make them more accessible and more durable and give them longevity. So it's sort of all reinforced the excellent points you've made there, John. John, sort of bringing this all to a logical head then, in the context of what you've been sharing with us, what actions should aspiring and existing property investors be taking right now as you see it, given that there is still a dearth of negativity floating through the media and paralysing people into doing nothing?
I think the first thing is, get informed, find out as much as you can about how the property market works. You don't have to make any commitments. We've got a website called lindemanreports.com.au, and you can go there and get lots of free information about how the market works and how you might be able to invest safely in future. And there are many other sites as well as, Bushy's own podcast channels, which provide huge amounts of valuable information. I'd say get informed as much as you can before you do anything, and before you make any decisions. That's probably my main word would be find out as much as you can.
Yeah, nothing greater than knowledge because it reduces fear, it gives you comfort and clarity. So, but again, there's a lot of people in this day and age who are outsourcing the responsibility for that to others because they just don't want to make the time. And potentially to their own detriment, I think, as a consequence of that. And I think, there's no better information than what you produce on your websites to really give people clarity so that they are making decisions based on all of the right information, not just on gut feel or intuition, as you mentioned earlier. John, I'd love to sort of transition now into what I affectionately refer to as the ambush round, which are the fast 4 questions that every guest gets to answer, and you get issued with the blindfold and the cigarette before we do that. John, to kick that off, what's your favourite quote and why?
I think my favourite quote, it's a Chinese one, and it's even the longest journey begins with a single step. And I think it's my favourite quote because it exemplifies the idea that you take action. It doesn't matter how small it is, just start doing something, and you'll find that each step becomes easier. And so the further you go, the easier that journey becomes. But, take that first step.
Timeless classic, and it's all about action. Doesn't matter how much knowledge we take in, and knowledge is important, as we've discussed. But if you don't do anything with that knowledge, you're going nowhere. So, no, that's a really good one. Now, let's turn back to the literary field. On top of your 2 great books, what's the top book that you'd recommend we read and why?
I think the book I got the most value out of, and I think others could as well, is Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. That really gives you a roadmap on how to, live not just daily, but the rest of your life to a plan and a purpose. It's a great book, very easy. These 7 steps are, not difficult. And one example that really stuck with me was where he talks about the clock and the compass, and he says we're all governed by the clock. We have timetables, we go to work, we do this, we do that, meetings and so on, and we forget about the compass, which is the real meaning of why we are here. Why are we doing this stuff? Having directions in your life and a purpose in your life. And he says you should devote much more to the compass activities rather than the clock activities. And I think what I've added to that is one more, which is to also have an anchor. Be anchored in the present. Remember that you can't change the past, and you don't know really what the future's holding for you, but you can do something about your life right now, and that's have an anchor, be anchored in the present.
Yeah, I love that. I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey's work. When that book first came out, and I'm probably displaying my vintage a little bit now, but I brought there's almost like a Filofax version, a diary that enabled you to actually turn the book into living action, and I followed that with great discipline for a number of years. It made a big difference to the results that I was achieving that stage. And as you say, it all comes back to the compass and the why and the purpose that's behind what you're doing as the key value alignment driver to make sure that you are staying on course. So, yeah, great words of wisdom there. I want to sort of switch back into the investment arena for a minute and get you to share with us what you consider to be both the worst and the best piece of investment advice that you've ever received, John.
I think the worst was probably from my parents, which is they, said all debt is bad debt. And they were quite convinced, it was get a house, you buy a house and pay it off as soon as you can, get rid of that debt. So that was really bad advice because, and even, in terms of when you're starting out, you're much better off renting a place and buying an investment property, which is what I did, because the returns from that investment property would be far greater than if you buy a property to live in. So I'd even say that was, bad advice. I love my parents and have the greatest respect for them, but they weren't really great on property investing.
On the flip side, what's been the best piece of investment advice that you've ever received? I
think it was when I worked at the Bureau of Statistics, and there was a trend analysis expert there, and he taught me the value of looking at trends, saying, you cannot beat trend analysis in terms of working out what's going to happen. You negate a lot of the guesswork and the sort of opinions, all of that, because you're looking at numbers and which way they're moving. So I think that the best advice was look at the trends to see what's happening and what's likely to happen in future.
Beautifully said. I'm going to go a little bit on tangent here because there's a lot of talk at the moment of the value of data, but we're almost buried in data now. John, there's so much free information that's available through the internet that a lot of people are sort of getting themselves confused over which data is actually relevant to helping them make the right decisions. Now, if you're a capital growth investor in the early stage of your journey, can you give us some thoughts on, what are the key bits of data that we need to, and you mentioned the 3 Ps, obviously, but there are any additional sources and or pieces of data that we should be focusing on to help us make those good decisions and ignore some of the other?
Yeah, no, sorry, I grimaced then because my cat just decided to make an entrance once again, but he's out of the picture now. The key pieces of data, I think the 2 basic pieces of data you should be looking at are listings, and that is simply the number of houses or units that are for sale in an area, and then track those, which you can do quite easily by going to, say, realestate.com.au or domain, and just seeing, are they moving up or down? And then the same site will give you the number of sales that have occurred. So you can look back and say, well, are the number of sales increasing or decreasing? They're 2 simple pieces of data. If sales are going up and listings are going down, that means that prices are highly likely to rise in future. But having said that, data can tell you what's going to happen, where and when, but it can't tell you why. And one of the lessons I learned was in looking at, and we've developed our own database that tracks all of these indicators, and it was coming up with this little town called Curry, and it said that Curry, the number of listings had dropped dramatically and it was going to boom. Now, Curry is on King Island, which is in Bass Strait in between Victoria and Tasmania.
Yep.
Couldn't work out why has the number of listings fallen so much. it's going to boom. So we got on a plane, or two planes, actually, one to Melbourne and one to King Island, to have a look. And what we discovered was that there were two real estate agents in Curry, and one hadn't paid their bill. And so realestate.com.au said, right, we're taking all your listings off the site. And so the number of listings that, on realestate.com for Curry suddenly halved, and that's all it was. So, unless you're checking to see, well, why has that change occurred, it can actually mislead you.
Yeah, there you go. Well, there's the danger of data in some sense, because in an area like that with such a small sample, the results can and so concentrated make things look very different to what's underlying. So again, boots on the ground. You took the action of jumping on a plane and walking the streets and talking to people. I think there's the complement between the data indicators and on the ground exercise that really investors who are serious about what they're doing need to bring together, because if you're relying on one or the other, you're missing out on a big chunk of the pie. So some great advice there. Last exercise in the fast forward, John. Can you share with us a rewarding ritual or daily discipline that you employ that's contributed most to your investment success?
Well, I think the one thing that's contributed most is you make a list of all the things, all the things you need to do that day, and then you do the things that you least want to do first. So get all those things out of the way that you really don't want to do and are most likely to put off until the next day, and then put them off again. So, get rid of the things you don't want to do but you really need to first, and make that a daily ritual and say, right, now I'll get rid of those, and then I can enjoy the rest of my day doing the things I really want to do, and not the other way around, because otherwise they'll end up getting put off again and again.
I love that, because that's often the choice between the important and the urgent, because the urgent things they feel more appealing, but it means that you're not pushing the big rocks into the jar and letting the sand fill the cracks. And what happens if you pour the sand in first, of course, then the important stuff never gets a look in. Yeah. So some great thoughts there. But been an awesome conversation, John. I feel like we're only just scratching the surface. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to continue the conversation moving forward to sort of dive into various aspects of the exercise, both here on Get Invested and Realty Talk as times transpire. But if I can get you just to summarise what we've talked about today, what are the key takeaways and must-do actions that aspiring and existing investors need to take?
I think the first thing is, get as much information as you can, and then start taking action to do something about it, get involved in the property market. And, even if you're a startup investor and you think, well, I haven't got a lot of money or I can't borrow much, it doesn't really matter. There are areas in Australia is such a huge continent. There's always investment opportunities, and we can look at areas such as Whyalla in South Australia. You can buy a house there for $200,000 and get 9% yield. Has it got growth potential? Well, if it does, then that's a great investment. So you can start with, not a lot of money at all, but make that start. And remember, too, the other thing about timing the market is that it's really important to buy in areas that have got good imminent growth potential, not buying for, long, slow periods of growth, but you want to make that money as quickly as you possibly can. And there's lots of ways you can do that, which we explain on our website as well, how to help you do that.
Yeah, I love that, John. Well, for those in the audience like myself who have really resonated with what you shared with us today, and you've touched on this already, but how can listeners find out more and get more involved with you, John?
Well, our website is Lindeman Reports. That's Lindeman Reports, all one word, .com.au. There's lots of blogs, videos. There's a heap of information. We've got a free newsletter you can subscribe to as well. And also, we're going to make a special offer. Should I mention that now, Bushy?
Perfect timing. You beat me,
okay,
John. So please share it with us.
Right. What I'm doing is offering anybody who would like to take advantage of my time, half an hour of my time with a free telephone consultancy, no obligation. There's no sell. you can just ask me your most pressing questions about your current investments, or whether you think you might be investing, or is it even worthwhile to do that? Whatever the questions are, I'm happy to answer them in a half-hour telephone conversation with you. And we can do that. You can book your time by going to lindemanreports.com.au and looking up free consultation and booking in a mutual convenient time. But I'm sure Bushy will provide a link to the that site as well.
Absolutely will, and I'll do that just after I book my session in with you, John, because we're actually taste testing a number of destinations around the country at the moment, looking for our sort of forever destination for the next 10 years or so. So I'll be taking advantage of that, and I'm really going to encourage everyone listening to the show to take advantage of that. It's very rare that you get an opportunity to talk personally to someone with the wealth and wisdom of experience in property that John brings to the table. You normally pay hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for the level and depth of expertise you're able to share in that direction, John. So it's an extremely generous offer. And I'll be very surprised if there's not a lot of people that are beating down the doors to share that time with you, mate. So, look, it's been a really good conversation. I'm hoping this is going to be the start of many, as I've mentioned before. So I really want to thank you for being so generous and humble in your approach, John. It's a real rarity in this day and age to find people who are not only good at what they do, but have a humility that goes with it, and the genuine care that comes across in everything you do in helping people to better secure their own futures, John. So thanks again, and let's keep the conversation going.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And to everyone that's listening and watching, I wish you all the best of success with your own investing.
Thank you, John. Thanks for tuning in to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, your home for property investment insights and inspiration. And don't leave yet until you've taken the next step towards living by design by getting my award-winning book, Get Invested, absolutely free when you sign up at knowhowproperty.com.au or bushymartin.com.au. And finally, make sure you subscribe to Property Hub to get your weekly dose of Get Invested inspiration, along with every episode of Realty Talk, Australia's leading property show for red-hot property investing news and insights, direct from industry leaders and influencers. Remember to always get invested in your knowledge, and I look forward to seeing you next time.